The thing is that I am going to talk about myself, which I rarely do because well, for one thing, I prefer to talk about things I know nothing about. And secondly, I'm a recovering narcissist, and I didn't know I was a narcissist, actually. I thought narcissism meant you love yourself, and then someone told me there's a flip side to it. So it's actually drearier than self-love. It's unrequited self-love. I don't feel I can afford a relapse. But I want to, though, explain how I came to design my own particular brand of comedy, because I've been through so many different forms of it. I started in improvisation, in a particular form of improvisation called theater games, which had one rule, which I always thought was a great rule for an ethic for a society, and the rule was you couldn't deny the other person's reality. You could only build on it. And of course, we live in a society that's all about contradicting other people's reality. It's all about contradiction, which I think is why I'm so sensitive to contradiction in general, why I see it everywhere. Like polls, you know, it's always curious to me that in public opinion polls, the percentage of Americans who don't know the answer to any given question is always 2%. 75% of Americans think Alaska is part of Canada, but only 2% don't know the effect that the debacle in Argentina will have on the IMF's monetary policy. To me is a contradiction. Or this ad that I read in the New York Times: wearing a fine watch speaks loudly of your rank in society. Buying it from us screams good taste. Or this that I found in a magazine called California Lawyer in an article that Shirley meant for the lawyers at Enron. Surviving the slammer, do's and don'ts. Don't use big words. Learn the lingua franca. Yeah, lingua this, Frankie, but and I suppose it's a contradiction that I talk about science and when I don't know math, you know, because, and by the way, I was so grateful to Dean Kamen for pointing out that one of the reasons, that there are cultural reasons that women and minorities don't enter the fields of science and technology, because, for instance, the reason I don't do math is I was taught to do math and read at the same time. So you're 6 years old, you're reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It becomes rapidly obvious that there are only two kinds of men in the world, dwarves and Prince Charmings, and the odds are 7 to 1 against your finding the prince. That's why little girls don't do math, it's too depressing. Of course, by talking about science, I also may, as I did the other night, incur the violent wrath of some scientists who were very upset with me. And I think it's, I use the word postmodern as if it were okay. And they got very upset. And one of them, to his credit, I think really just wanted to engage me in a serious argument. I don't engage in serious arguments. I don't approve of them. Because arguments, of course, are all about contradiction, and they're shaped by the values that I have questions with, the values of Newtonian science, like rationality. You're supposed to be rational in an argument. Well, rationality is constructed by what Christy Hefner was talking about today, that mind-body split, you know? So the head is good, body bad, head is ego, body id. When we say I, as when Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, we mean the head. And as David Lee Roth sang in Just a Gigolo, I ain't got no body. So that's how you get rationality. And that's why so much of humor is the body asserting itself against the head. That's why you have toilet humor and sexual humor, and that's why you have the Raspini brothers, you know, whacking Richard in the genital area. And we're laughing doubly then because it's the, he's the body, but it's also...
Richard,
what did I say? Richard, yes, but it's also the head, the head of the conference. Because that's the other way that humor, like Art Buchwald, he takes shots at the heads of state. He asserts it doesn't make quite as much money as body humor, I'm sure, but nevertheless what makes us treasure you and adore you. But there's also a contradiction in rationality in this country, though, which is as much as we revere the head, we're very anti-intellectual. I know this because I read in the New York Times, the Ayn Rand Foundation took out a full-page ad after September 11th, in which they said, the problem is not Iraq or Iran. The problem in this country, facing this country, is the university professors and their spawn. And so I went back and reread The Fountainhead. I don't know how many of you have read it. And I'm not an expert on sadomasochism. But let me just read you a couple of random passages from page 217. The act of a master taking painful, contemptuous possession of her was the kind of rapture she wanted. When they lay together in bed, it was as it had to be, as the nature of the act demanded, an act of violence. It was an act of clenched teeth and hatred. It was the unendurable, not a caress, but a wave of pain. The agony is an act of passion. So you can imagine my surprise on reading in The New Yorker that Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Federal Reserve, claims Ayn Rand as his intellectual mentor. It's like Find Me at Your Nanny as a dominatrix. Bad enough we had to see J. Edgar Hoover in a dress. Now we have to picture Alan Greenspan in a black leather corset with a butt tattoo that says, "Whip inflation now." And Ayn Rand, of course, Ayn Rand is famous for a philosophy called objectivism, which it reflects another value of Newtonian physics, which is objectivity, and objectivity basically is constructed in that same S&M way. It's the subject subjugating the object. That's how you assert yourself. You make yourself the active voice, and the object is the passive no voice. I was so fascinated by that oxygen commercial. I don't know if you know this, but maybe it's different now, or maybe you were making a statement, but in many hospital nurseries across the country, until very recently anyway, according to a book by Jessica Benjamin, the signs over the little boys' cribs read, "I'm a boy," and the signs over the little girls' cribs read, "It's a girl." Yeah. So the passivity was culturally, projected onto the little girls. And, this still goes on. As I think I told you last year, there's a poll that proves this, a poll that was given by Time magazine, in which only men were asked, have you ever had sex with a woman you actively disliked? And, 58% said yes, which I think is overinflated, though, because so many men, if you just say, have you ever had sex? Yes! They don't even wait for the rest of the word. And of course, 2% did not know whether they'd had sex. That's the first callback of my attempted quadruple. So this subject-object thing, is part of something I'm very interested in, because this is why, frankly, I believe in political correctness. I do. I think it can go too far. I think Ringling Brothers may have gone too far with an ad they took out in the New York Times magazine. We have a lifelong emotional and financial commitment to our Asian elephant partners. Maybe too far, but I think that I don't think that a person of color making fun of white people is the same thing as a white person making fun of people of color, or a woman making fun of men is the same as men making fun of women, or poor people making fun of rich people the same as rich people. I think you can make fun of the haves, but not the have-nots, which you know, is why you don't see me making fun of Kenneth Lay and his charming wife. 'Cause, I mean, what's funny about being down to 4 houses? You know, and I really learned this lesson during the sex scandals of the Clinton administration, or as I call them, the good old days. When people I knew, you know, people who considered themselves liberal and everything else, were making fun of Jennifer Flowers and Paula Jones, and basically they were making fun of them for being trailer trash or white trash. And it seems, I suppose, like a harmless prejudice and that you're not really hurting anybody until you read, as I did, an ad in the Los Angeles Times. For sale, white trash compactor. So this whole subject-object thing has relevance to humor in this way. I read a book by a woman named Amy Richland, who's the chair of the classics department at USC, and the book is called The Garden of Priapus. And she says that Roman humor mirrors the construction of Roman society, so that Roman society was very top-bottom, as ours is, to some degree, and so was humor. There always had to be the butt of a joke. So it was always the satirist, like Juvenal or Marshall, represented the audience, and he was going to make fun of the outsider, the person who didn't share that subject status. And in stand-up, of course, the stand-up comedian is supposed to dominate the audience. A lot of heckling is the tension of trying to make sure that the comedian is going to be able to dominate and overcome the heckler. And I got good at that when I was a stand-up, but I always hate it because they were dictating the terms of the interaction in the same way that engaging in a serious argument determines the content, to some degree, of what you're talking about. And I was looking for a form that didn't have that. And so I wanted something that was more interactive, and I know that word is so debased now by the use of it by internet marketers. Yeah, I really miss the old telemarketers now, I'll tell you that. I do, because at least there you stood a chance. You know, I honestly used to actually hang up on them, but then I read in Dear Abby that was rude. So the next time one called, I let him get halfway through his spiel, and then I said, "You sound sexy." He hung up on me. But the interactivity allows the audience to shape what you're going to do as much as you shape their experience of the world. And that's really what I'm looking for. And I was sort of, as I was starting to analyze what exactly it is that I do, I read a book called Trickster Makes This World by Lewis Hyde, and it was like being psychoanalyzed. I mean, he had laid it all out. And then coming to this conference, I realized that most everybody here shared those same qualities, because really what Trickster is an agent of change. Trickster is a change agent, and the qualities that I'm about to describe are the qualities that make it possible to make change happen. And one of these is boundary crossing. I think this is what so, in fact, infuriated the scientists, but I like to cross boundaries. I like to, as I said, talk about things I know nothing about. And I hope that's my agent, because you aren't paying me anything. And I think it's good to talk about things I know nothing about, because I bring a fresh viewpoint to it. You know, I'm able to see the contradiction that you may not be able to see. Like, for instance, a mime once, or a meme as he called himself. You know, he was a very selfish meme. And he said that I had to show more respect because it took up to 18 years to learn how to do mime properly. And I said, well, That's how you know only stupid people go into it. It only takes 2 years to learn how to talk. And you know, people, this is the problem with, quote, objectivity, end quote. When you're only surrounded by people who speak the same vocabulary as you or share the same set of assumptions as you, you start to think that that's reality. Like economists, you know, their definition of rational, that we all act out of our own economic self-interest. Well, look at Michael Hawley, or look at Dean Kamen. I mean, or look at my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother always acted in other people's interest, whether they wanted her to or not. You know, if they had had an Olympics in martyrdom, my grandmother would have lost on purpose. No, you take the prize. You're young, I'm old. Who's going to see it? Where am I going? I'm going to die. You know, it's very... So that's one, this boundary crossing, this being a go-between, which Fritz Lanting, is that his name, actually said that he was a go-between. That's an actual quality of the trickster. And another is non-oppositional strategies. And this is, you know, instead of contradiction, where you deny the other person's reality, you have paradox, where you allow more than one reality to coexist. I think there's another philosophical construction. I'm not sure what it's called, but my example of it is a sign that I saw in a jewelry store. It said, "Ears pierced while you wait." There, the alternative just boggles the imagination. Oh, no, thanks, Phil, but I'll leave him here. Thanks very much. I have some errands to run, so I'll be back to pick him up around 5, if that's okay with you. What? Can't hear you, Bob. And another attribute of the trickster that is smart luck, that accidents, that Louis Kahn talked about accidents. This is another quality of the trickster. The trickster has a mind that is prepared for the unprepared. That, and I will say this to the scientists, that the trickster has the ability to hold his ideas lightly so that he can let room in for new ideas or to see the contradictions or the hidden problems with his ideas. I have no joke for that, I just wanted to put the scientists in their place. But here's how I think I like to make change, and that is in making connections. This is what I tend to see almost more than contradictions, like what did he call those toes of the gecko? You know, the toes of the gecko curling, uncurling, like the fingers of Michael Moschen. I love connections. Like, I'll read that one of the 2 attributes of matter in the Newtonian universe. There are 2 attributes of matter in the Newtonian universe. One is space occupancy. Matter takes up space, and I guess the more you matter, the more space you take up, which explains the whole SUV phenomenon, you know? And the other one, though, is impenetrability. Well, in ancient Rome, impenetrability was the criterion of masculinity. Masculinity depended on you being the active penetrator. And then in economics, there's an active producer and a passive consumer, which explains why business always has to penetrate new markets. Well, yeah, I mean, why we forced China to open her markets, you know, and didn't that feel good? And now we're being penetrated. You know, the biotech companies are actually going inside us and planting their little flags on our genes. You know, we're being penetrated. And I suspect by someone who actively dislikes us. And that's the second of the quadruple. Yes, of course, you got that. Thank you very much. I still have way to go. And what I hope to do when I make these connections is short circuit people's thinking, you know, make you not follow your usual train of association, but make you rewire literally, it's when people say about the shock of recognition, it's literally recognition, rewiring how you think. And I had a joke to go with this, and I've forgotten it. I'm so sorry. I'm getting like the woman in that joke about, have you heard this joke about the woman driving with her mother? And the mother is elderly, and the mother goes right through a red light, and the daughter doesn't want to say anything. She doesn't want to be like, you're too old to drive. And then the mother goes through a second red light, and the daughter says, as tactfully as possible, Mom, are you aware that you just went through 2 red lights? And the mother says, oh, am I driving? And that's the shock of recognition at the shock of recognition. That completes the quadruple. And I just want to say 2 more things. One is another characteristic of trickster is that the trickster has to walk this fine line. He has to have poise. And you know, the biggest hurdle for me in doing what I do is constructing my performance so that it's prepared and unprepared. Finding the balance between those things, and always dangerous because you might tip off too much in the direction of unprepared, but being too prepared doesn't leave room for the accidents to happen. And I was thinking about what Moshe Safdie said yesterday about beauty, because in his book, Hyde says that sometimes trickster can tip over into beauty, but to do that, you have to lose all the other qualities, because once you're into beauty, you're into a finished thing. You're into something that occupies space and inhabits time. It's an actual thing. And it is always extraordinary to see a thing of beauty. But if you don't do that, if you allow for the accident to keep on happening, you have the possibility of getting on a wavelength. You know, with your, I like to think of what I do as, you know, as a probability wave. When you go into beauty, the probability wave collapses into one possibility, and I like to explore all the possibilities and the hope that you'll be on the wavelength of your audience. And the one final quality I want to say about trickster is that he doesn't have a home. He's always on the road. And I want to say to you, Richard, in closing, that in TED you've created a home, and thank you for inviting me into it. Thank you very much.